Without further ado, this is episode 42 of Worlds Beyond Number, titled Match My Breath and Walk in My Footsteps. So we pick up, and I wanted to ask you about this. Is it Bracken? Is that the town
Yeah.
they're in? Do you know?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I wrote it down and I misspelled it really badly, and I was like, is that word Bracken? So anyway, we pick up with the soldiers who, our crew, obviously, who is also in Bracken, but they're celebrating with Suvi in the beer garden. But when all of these other soldiers also arrive in Bracken, and the cliffhanger was kind of Ame overhearing some stuff about the Great Bullfrog Spirit and a wizard dressed in red that had caught Ursulon's eye. So that was kind of the cliffhanger, and we pick up right in that moment. And basically, there's all this commotion of these returning soldiers just talking about how awesome it was that the Archmage Silence banished this great bullfrog spirit. And they're all celebrating and happy. And obviously, Ame is, very disturbed by this. And we even have like a double down confirmation on this whole thing happening because Sworn says, "Whoa, like, are you sure it was one of like the great spirits? Because that's what that bullfrog is." And the soldiers are like, "Yeah, Silence showed up and he just like banished it away." And everyone's like, "Amazing." So we then cut to Ursulon, who is still staring down this wizard dressed in red. And Brennan describes this guy as one of the most evil men you have ever seen, Ursulon. And this dude just locks eyes with Ursulon and comes straight to him. And he introduces himself as Keen of the Glass Coronet, which is the mages in service to the crown. And Keen wants to know, like, whoa, how did you come to be in the Wizard Sky's service? And Ursulon tells him that we were childhood friends. And Keen is really tickled by this. He thinks he's joking at first, but when he realizes Ursulon is serious, he's like, wow, that's crazy. Like, I've never heard of a situation like that. And so he's tickled by that. And then basically they go their separate ways. At this point, Ame comes up to Ursulon and tells him about what she had heard about the bullfrog spirit. And she's like, we got to get out of here. So we then cut to Suvi, who, if you recall, is not at the beer garden in the festivities right now. She has actually gone to the governor's hall to speak with Steele via the speaking mirror. That has already concluded, but that's still where she is. So she is actually escorted to her quarters, which are in the governor's hall. And here she kind of freshens up, takes a bath, starting to put her things back together to go join her friends when she takes a look at her spell book. And she sees that the spider from the music box, which we known was missing thanks to Steele's report, is actually now embedded in her spell book. And there's this really cool sequence where they kind of communicate a bit, and we realize that the spider, having like read through Suvi's spell book, now can like produce some rudimentary language, the same way it can like project little like movies, which was part of its purpose in the music box, storing the information and then displaying it. It can now kind of project letters to like, again, rudimentary communicate with Suvi, saying like, is this okay? Like, what's my name? Very simple things. And essentially, it reveals via a little projection movie the moment where Rasper took the music box from Suvi when he, absconded to return that to the Citadel. The spider jumped out because it didn't want to leave Suvi. And it's at that point that it embedded itself in the book. And the long and the short of it is, Suvi is ecstatic that she has a new little friend, and the spider is excited to have a purpose. And so she names him Task. And she, comments that I'm always better with the task. Excuse me. So after that little moment, she goes to meet up with her friends, and they actually head each other off as Ame and Ursulon were leaving this party. So Ame then tells Suvi about the whole bullfrog thing, and Ursulon or Suvi asks, like, "Are you guys going to like deal with this right now?" And Ursulon says, "I will leave in the morning." And so Suvi says, okay, well, we will talk tomorrow morning then, because she notices that all of her soldiers are like, they have spied her outside the beer garden. And so they're like rushing over, being like, we got to celebrate. So she goes to meet up with them, and Ame and Ursulon still remain outside. So Ame then says to Ursulon, like, hey, can we use your pocket watch to see maybe where this giant bullfrog is? And Ursulon says, no, like, I'm not interested in that. I want to help the children first. And Ame's like, well, they might be kind of one and the same. If we help the great bullfrog, then he can help us help the children and the Grenault children, for reference. And Ursulon's like, no, like, I am tired of needing other people's help. I am tired of waiting. Like, I am going to take action on this. I can help those children. That's what I'm going to do. That's my priority. Ame, if you want to go help the great bullfrog, you can go do that. And after I save the children, I will come meet up with you and help you. And it's kind of a tense moment. Ame's like kind of like upset by this. And she just says, well, okay, can I at least see your pocket watch so I can get the general direction of maybe where this is? And Ursulon says, yeah. And it's to the southeast, I believe. So Ursulon says, okay, well, I'm going to go celebrate with Suvi for tonight. And then tomorrow, I'll be on my way. And Ame says, okay. And the two of them split. Ursulon going to return to Suvi. It's at this point that Ame's like, I need to find out more information, what I can, about this bullfrog. So she goes to speak to a skyship captain named Colonel Armand, who was at this battle where Silence banished the bullfrog. And she speaks to her, just trying to find out what she can. And she basically doesn't learn anything too new, but that this bullfrog appeared and tried to like croak, but was silenced. And then, as if he was still like expelling the air from the croak, he just kept like shrinking and shrinking until he vanished. But the important detail here is that Armand reveals that the bullfrog wasn't looking at Silence when this happened. The bullfrog was looking at this garrison in the middle of the town, which Ame now presumes to be where the Grenault children were being held. So we then cut to Suvi back in the celebration, where the wizard Keen now approaches her. And he says, I heard our dispelling agent served you well. I'm really happy to hear that. And he toasts her and also mentions, like, never met a wizard who has a witch and a spirit in her service, just based on loyalty. And Suvi's like, yeah, you've never met a wizard like me. And then he kind of leaves, and she's like, what a creep. It's basically at that point that Ursulon returns to her, and she shares with him, like, hey, things have made me really uncomfortable, like, since being here, about how the Citadel like wants to treat you and Ame, wants to get you guys enlisted in our service, how they're treating those Grenault children, the bullfrog spirit thing. And she basically apologizes to him for not seeing this earlier. And he says, I understand, Suvi, but I will be leaving tomorrow to go try and help these children. And Suvi's like, well, can I join you? Like, would that be okay? And Ursulon says, you can, but only if you match my breath and walk in my footsteps, the episode title. Basically saying that, like, I will not be seeking the ideal outcome, just one that, helps these kids. And Suvi agrees to that. It's at this point that Silver and the wizard Slain walk over to Suvi and basically congratulate her. And we find out that Silver is getting promoted to join Slain's like entourage, for lack of a better word, where he will be now on the front lines reporting with him. And Suvi's happy for him. Like, this is a big deal, big promotion. And so the two of them basically go to celebrate together at her room in the governor's ball. And at that point, Ursulon's like, okay, well, I'm going to head to the stables and go to sleep. And then as we swap back to Ame to see what she's up to, I will hand it off to you if you're good to go.
Yes. Thank you, my friend. Yeah. So Ame realizes, okay, if we're gonna do this thing, I need more info. I need to get back to, I was gonna say Grandmother Wren's cottage, my cottage, and I need to find out whatever I can find out about 12 Brooks. So she gets out the knockers, one of my favorite side characters, if you can call it that.
Yes.
And looks for a door. Brennan's like, okay, what door are you gonna put it into? She goes back to like the bathrooms of the beer garden, and there's like a little utility closet. The fox goes into the bathrooms and like creates a mess, and like hijinks ensue to like distract people from Ame working on this utility closet. Steps inside, replaces the knocker, steps through, and she is back in her cottage. and Neef is there. Neef is awake and is like, oh, it's a late hour. Let me put some tea on. And Ami's like, oh, don't worry about it. And Neef actually insists, like, hey, I'd love to kind of study with you, which seems to be a bit of a rare instance for Neef compared to her time in the Citadel. So with Neef's help, she begins going through the books and documents of Grandmother Wren's, and she does, in fact, eventually find a map from what seems to be an old lover of Grandmother Wren's, who has sent a letter and a map of 12 Brooks. And this is after Ame had a really high roll. I think Brennan gave like the minimum was like maybe a 15 or something. And it was an over 20 roll, maybe 22, 23. And so Brennan's like, you get it all. You get it all. And it is, like I mentioned, an extensive like trade routes, sewer system, like everything you could possibly need to get into 12 Brooks. Ame's about to leave, but not before Neef basically just says like, hey, I'm really glad that, you know, I get to be here. And also kind of mentions like, hey, by the way, it'd be cool to have a familiar. I know Indri said that I would get one when I was done being an apprentice, and it seems like I'm no longer an apprentice. So then Ame's like, makes sense to me. Like, maybe we can talk about that later. And then there's this really funny line of like Neef being like, I'm so glad you knocked me out and kidnapped me and brought me here. So just a fun dialogue. Ame leaves, goes back to the bathroom. There's a fun little detail of Brennan being like, do you replace the door knob? And she's like, I just stick it back in there, and, you know, someone else's problem. And basically, with this information in hand, goes to the stables to sleep with Ursulon. Sleep in the hay with Ursulon. Context. We cut then over to Suvi and Suvi and Silver. And Silver is just enamored about being in Slane's entourage. And as this is happening, Suvi realizes it was going to be a hard conversation. And she realizes just how diametrically opposed she is to Silver's really sort of allegiance to the Citadel, but really just intentions, I guess. So she jumps in and says, like, basically it's the beginning of what seems like a breakup conversation. And Silver is like totally thrown by this. He's like, well, what's going on? We were talking about like, I'm going to be safe. Because he's going to 12 Brooks as well with Slane's entourage, and Suvi's going to go with Ursulon and Ame. And so she's like, you know, would you stay here if I asked you to? And he's like, well, why would I? Like, this is my mission. You have your mission, and like yada yada. And she basically just goes for broke and just says, hey, I want to tell you what really happened with the Greneau family. And she admits to lying to all of the soldiers and that they were trying to protect the family. We get this incredible line from Aabria where Silver's like, that's all propaganda about stealing children. Like, how can you prove that otherwise? And Aabria gives this incredible line of Suvi of now the shoe being on the other foot, basically, of now realizing all those times her friends tried to have the same conversation and they were silenced because they couldn't prove without any verifiable beyond the shadow of a doubt. And so she's like, this is what I know. This is what I'm going to do. And basically says, you know, I'm going to 12 Brooks as well. And, you know, we're just, you know, this doesn't seem like we're on the same page. Silver basically says, you know, it's probably best for me to go right now, but I'd love for us to talk in the morning. He leaves, and Suvi knows that she won't be there in the morning. She'll have left with Ursulon and Ame. She opts to go to the stables. She doesn't sleep by them, but she sleeps in the stables in the same area. Ame wakes up and is like, Suvi, what are you doing? Like, come sleep with us. And Suvi insists not doing that. And so Ame falls asleep by her. And then Ursulon wakes up and brings like his cloak and like lays it on them. And they all fall asleep in the stables together. And that is where episode 42 ends of The Wizard, the Witch, and the Wild One. Something, hold your breath and walk in my footsteps. Match my breath. Yeah. Match my breath and walk in my footsteps. And if you're watching just the recap, click the link, get our full discussion, and let us know what you thought about it as well.